Some ideas do more than just define an era. They ignite a conflict that can span centuries. Today, we're going to explore a philosophical argument that traces one of modern history's deepest debates all the way back to its origin. And it proposes a whole new way to think about defending liberty. What if the most defining political struggle of our time didn't actually begin in the 20th century? What if it started with just one single document published way back in 1848? An idea that set in motion a profound, lasting battle over the very nature of power and freedom. To really get a grip on the central argument we're exploring today, we've got to go back in time, back to the mid-19th century, a period of incredible revolution, not just in industry, but in ideas. So, in 1848, this text gets published, and it aimed to completely redefine the economic and social foundations of civilization. The Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. And this wasn't just some academic paper. This was the starting gun for a historical conflict that would go on to shape the next 2 centuries. And for nearly 200 years now, that conflict has been raging. It's a battle of ideas that has literally built empires, toppled governments, and you can still hear its echoes in our political debates right up to this very moment. When you boil it all down, what Marx's manifesto really kicked off was a struggle between 2 fundamentally opposing principles for how to organize human society. The core tension, well, it's laid bare right here. On one side, you have the principle of centralized power, the idea that society is best run through collective structures and detailed state planning. On the other side, the principle of individual liberty. This champions personal freedom, a limited government, and what economists sometimes call spontaneous order. The idea that a functional society can actually emerge from the free, uncoordinated actions of individuals. So, as this ideological battle heated up, some of the sharpest thinkers of the 20th century started sounding the alarm, issuing these stark warnings about where the path of centralized power could ultimately lead. Okay, first up, let's talk about the economist and philosopher Friedrich Hayek, who saw the inherent dangers in this new way of thinking. In his classic work, The Road to Serfdom, Hayek made this absolutely crucial point. He argued that when a government takes control of the economy, it never just stops there. To make central planning actually work, the state has to progressively regulate more and more of an individual's life. Economic control, he warned, always becomes political control. Now, giving us a really chilling fictional version of Hayek's economic warning was the literary visionary George Orwell. What Orwell did in his novel 1984 was take this idea and follow it to its most terrifying logical endpoint. He painted a picture of the ultimate totalitarian state, a world of constant surveillance, where language itself is twisted to control thought, and objective truth just ceases to exist. It was a powerful warning of the final stop on that road to serfdom. So you have Hayek and Orwell, and they just brilliantly broke down what happens once these systems get going. But their warnings, well, they point to a much deeper question about the nature of power itself. Are these moments of totalitarianism just one-offs in history? Tragic but ultimately contained anomalies? Or are we looking at something more fundamental, a pattern that just keeps repeating itself? Well, if you look at history, it really seems to be the latter. Systems of concentrated power don't just vanish when they're defeated. No, they transform, they adapt, and they reappear with new narratives, often making these very appealing promises of security or equality or stability. This tendency to concentrate power isn't an exception, it's a historical constant. Okay, so if this threat is a permanent thing, it means our defense of liberty can't just be temporary or reactive. And this brings us right to the core proposal of Osmar Martinez's work, a new framework for defending freedom. The proposed doctrine is called Permanent Anticommunism. Now let's be clear, this term isn't used to oppose a specific 20th century political system. It's much broader than that. It's a philosophical stance. It calls for a permanent, principled, and vigilant defense of liberty against any system of centralized power, no matter what name it gives itself. The whole point is to shift from just reacting to threats to maintaining a state of proactive, permanent awareness. And this kind of permanent vigilance is so important because freedom is almost never lost in one big, dramatic moment. More often it's a slow burn, a gradual erosion that follows a pretty predictable pattern. First, a crisis pops up, and with it, a promise of security. Second, in the name of that security, a reasonable restriction on freedom is introduced. Third, these restrictions subtly change the balance of power between the individual and the state. And finally, what was once just a temporary measure becomes the new, less free normal. Each step seems small, but the cumulative effect is profound. So this whole journey through history and philosophy, it all leads right back to us, here and now, and it leaves us with a really critical question. You know, it's kind of remarkable when you look at political history. It seems like every generation tends to view these dangers as belonging to their parents' or grandparents' time, relics of a past that could never happen again. But history has a funny way of returning, often in new disguises, right when we've forgotten how fragile it all is. And this leaves us with what might be the fundamental question for our time, one that goes way beyond the day-to-day noise of politics. It's not about left versus right, or this policy versus that one. The question is much deeper. Can liberty, as a core principle of civilization, actually survive without a permanent, conscious, and vigilant defense from the very societies that claim to cherish it? Everything we've discussed today is based on the ideas presented in the book, The Manifesto of Permanent Anticommunism, by Osmer Martinez. So if you want to take a much deeper dive into this doctrine for defending liberty, the book is really the definitive source. If these ideas resonated with you, you can explore them further by getting the book at odaflow.com. And to help get this message out there, please subscribe, like, and share this explainer. Awareness really is the first line of defense for a free society. It's a reminder that liberty is fragile and that it must be defended permanently.